I have worked for the state's Office of Infrastructure Compliance for 19 years. My job is not interesting to most people, and I have made peace with that. I audit municipal records. I verify that water systems, sewer mains, and small utility districts are maintained according to code, that the paperwork matches the pipes in the ground, and that the numbers a town reports to the state are the numbers reality would confirm if you went out and measured. I am good at this work because I notice when numbers do not behave the way numbers should. That is the whole skill, really. Most fraud and most failure look identical on a spreadsheet, a quantity that cannot be where it is. I am writing this down because I no longer trust that I will remember it correctly, and because if something happens to me, I want there to be a record that does not pass through the systems I am about to describe. I have kept copies. Where those copies are is not relevant to anyone reading this for honest reasons. Last autumn I drew an assignment I had been quietly hopping to avoid for most of my career. The state had finally funded a backlog clearance, a project to digitize and reconcile inspection records for the 11 northern counties, some of which had not been audited in person since the early 1990s. The records existed only as paper, stored in a climate-controlled annex behind the regional field office, and someone with the authority to certify their accuracy had to read every page, cross-reference it against the live databases, and flag discrepancies. I was that someone for 3 of those counties, including the one I grew up in. I want to be honest about how ordinary the first weeks were, because the ordinariness is the part that frightens me most now. I drove out to the annex on Mondays and worked through Thursday, a folding table, a laptop, a scanner, and rolling shelves that smelled of dust and old toner. The work is repetitive. You open a folder, you find the corresponding entry in the database, you confirm the meter readings, the maintenance intervals, the inspection sign-offs. When they match, you initial the page and move on. When they do not, you make a note and keep moving, because most discrepancies resolve themselves once you find the second document that explains them. A transposed digit, a route renumbered, a district absorbed into a larger one. The anomaly appeared in the 4th week, and it appeared the way real anomalies do, as something small and easy to dismiss. I was reconciling water usage logs for my home county. The county's water is managed by 3 districts, and I knew all 3 by name the way you know the names of roads you grew up on. There is the central district that serves the town itself, a southern agricultural district, and a small northern district that handles a few hundred rural connections. I had pulled the monthly consumption summaries going back to 1989 to compare them against the meter inventory. The totals are supposed to close. Water produced at the source, minus water sold to customers, minus an allowance for known loss through old pipe, should leave a residual that hovers near 0. Districts that don't close their books are either leaking badly or being stolen from, and either way it is my job to find out which. The central district did not close. It had not closed for a very long time. Every year the district produced more water than it could account for selling, not a dramatic amount, between 2 and 4%, which is well within the range you would attribute to leakage in a system with pipe that old. I would have written it off in 10 seconds, except that the discrepancy was too stable. Leakage grows. Pipe degrades, joints fail. The loss rate climbs year over year until somebody digs up a street and fixes it, and then it drops and starts climbing again. This loss did not climb and did not drop. It held, year after year, at almost exactly the same volume. Not the same percentage, the same volume. As the town grew and total consumption rose, the unaccounted water stayed a flat line underneath it, indifferent to everything around it. A leak does not behave like a customer. A customer behaves like a customer. A customer uses a roughly constant amount of water that changes slowly as their household changes. What I was looking at was not the signature of a failing pipe. It was the signature of a steady, deliberate draw, a fixed population of users that the district was producing water for and not billing. I did what I always do. I went looking for the second document that would explain the first. The obvious explanation was an unmetered municipal use. A park, a cemetery, a fire suppression system, something the town drew water for and didn't bill itself. Districts carry these on a separate ledger. I found the ledger. The municipal uses were all there, all metered, all accounted for separately, and none of them matched the volume or the flatness of the residual. Whatever was drawing that water was not the town watering its own grass, so I went to the infrastructure maps. The state holds two kinds of maps for any water system. There is the current operational map, which the district updates and submits annually, and there are the as-built engineering drawings, which are made once when infrastructure is constructed and almost never revised. The operational map is what the district says exists today. The as-builts are what was actually put in the ground. They diverge constantly. That's normal. That's half my job, but they diverge in predictable ways. The current map for the central district showed exactly what I expected. The town, the grid of streets I grew up on, the main running north along the highway to serve the scattered rural connections, terminating at the edge of the northern district. The as-builts showed something else. In a roll of drawings dated 1971, the northern main did not terminate where the current map said it did. It continued past the boundary, turned east along a section line and fed a distribution grid, a real one, branching mains, service laterals, the dense geometric signature of a residential subdivision, streets. The drawing named them: Cardiff Street, Halloran Street, Wexford Court, Pell Lane, 41 residential service connections, a pressure-reducing station, a small elevated storage tank. The whole thing was drawn with the same hand, the same conventions, the same engineer's stamp as the parts of the system I knew were real, the parts I could drive to in 20 minutes. I grew up in that county. I delivered newspapers in that county. I know there is no subdivision east of the northern boundary. There is wheat and a county road and a line of trees along a creek, and beyond that more wheat. There are no streets out there. There has never been anything out there. I would stake my life on it, which is a phrase I now regret using even in my own head. I noted the discrepancy, photographed the drawing, and told myself there was a simple answer. The most likely thing by far was that the subdivision had been platted, the water infrastructure built in anticipation of homes, and then the development had failed, financing collapsed. The developer went under and the streets and pipes were abandoned before a single house was raised. This happens. The state is full of ghost subdivisions, infrastructure poured into ground that was never built on, paper neighborhoods that exist as legal descriptions and nothing else. I had reconciled half a dozen of them. They are sad, not sinister. The explanation was sitting right there and I reached for it gratefully. The explanation did not survive contact with the water logs. A failed subdivision uses no water. Nobody lives there. The mains might be charged to maintain pressure in the larger system, but charged mains lose water at a known, calculable rate, and that loss is small, and it grows as the abandoned pipe corrodes. What I had was not a charged main bleeding pressure. What I had was 41 connections worth of steady residential consumption. The flat, fixed draw I had found in the residual, continuing without interruption from 1971 to the present. Somebody or something in that non-existent subdivision had been using water, in quantities consistent with occupied homes, for over 50 years. I checked the billing system next, because if water was being used, water should be billed, and billing records would tell me who the customers were. This is where the records first became actively contradictory rather than merely incomplete. The billing database for the Central District contained no accounts for any address on Cardiff, Halloran, Wexford, or Pell. I searched the street names directly and got nothing. I searched by the connection numbers from the as-built drawing and got nothing. As far as the system that takes people's money was concerned, those 41 connections did not exist and never had. But the consumption was real. I could see it being produced at the source. I could see it leaving the system. I could account for its volume to the gallon. The water was going somewhere and being used by someone, and the part of the institution that would normally record who and charge them had simply been removed. The way you might remove a single card from the middle of a deck, and square the rest so no one notices the gap. That is the detail that changed the nature of what I was doing. A failed subdivision is an absence, a thing that was planned and never came to be. What I was looking at was a presence that had been administratively hidden. Someone had built the part of the institution that delivers the water and maintains the pipe and monitors the pressure, and had deliberately not built, or had carefully unbuilt, the part that names the people and takes their money. You do not do that by accident. The accounting does not close itself. Someone every year for 50 years had to make a choice to keep the water flowing and the names off the ledger. I should say plainly that at no point did I consider not pursuing this. I have read enough of these accounts to know that the reader's patience for a narrator who walks away from the obvious thread, or who keeps a terrifying discovery to himself for no reason, is thin and deserved to be thin. I did not walk away because pursuing it was my literal job. I was the certifying inspector. A books don't close finding of this size, sustained over decades, was a mandatory escalation. I would have had to explain in writing why I had initialed off on a 50-year water theft pattern in my own home county. So I did the normal, required, professional thing. I went to talk to the people who would know. The Northern District is run out of a small operations building, really just a shop and an office on the north edge of town. The man who has run it for as long as anyone can remember is named Del Ackman, and I had known him, distantly, my whole life. He had been at my father's funeral. I called ahead, told him I was doing the state reconciliation, and asked if I could come by and walk through some of the older as-builts with him, the kind of thing that's easier with someone who remembers the system being built. He was friendly on the phone, the way men of his generation are friendly with the sons of men they buried. When I got there, he had coffee on, and we talked about the town, and about my father, and about nothing for 20 minutes before I unrolled the 1971 drawing on his desk. I have spent 19 years watching people's faces when I show them a document. There is a particular look people get when they are seeing something they wish you hadn't found, and it is not the same as the look of someone who is simply confused. Del Ackman did not look confused. He looked at the drawing for a moment, and then he looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as careful, and he said, "Where'd you pull that from?" I told him. The state annex, the as-built archive, the backlog clearance. He nodded slowly. He said the development out there had failed in the 70s before he started, that the pipe had been capped, and that I'd be wasting my time and the state's money chasing it. He said it pleasantly. He said it like a man who had said it before. And then, while he was saying it, he reached over and turned the drawing a few degrees on his desk, squaring it, the way you might straighten something that was making you uncomfortable to look at. I asked him about the consumption, about the steady draw, the flat residual, the 50 years of water going east of the boundary to a place that had been capped before he started. I watched him decide what to do with that. He told me the residual was a metering error on the source side, an old transducer that had read high for decades. He said it as a flat statement of fact, the way you state something you need to be true. And it was, I want to be fair, a possible explanation. A source meter reading consistently high would produce exactly the phantom volume I was seeing, except that the source meters had been replaced. I had the replacement records. They had been replaced in 1994 and again in 2011. Different manufacturers, different technologies, and the phantom volume had not changed by a single percentage point across either replacement. No metering error survives the replacement of the meter. He knew that. He had run a water system for 40 years. He knew it better than I did. He gave me the answer anyway, and when I did not write it down, something in his face closed. He told me, near the end, in a different voice than the rest of the conversation, that some of the old infrastructure out in the county was best left on paper. That the men who built this system had reasons for how they ran it, and that those reasons had kept the town's water clean and cheap, and uninterrupted for as long as anyone could remember. And that I was a careful young man who could do a great deal of damage by being careful about the wrong things. He was not threatening me. I have been threatened, and that was not it. He sounded, more than anything, tired. He sounded like a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had hoped to set it down before he had to explain it to anybody. I thanked him for the coffee and left. I want to record that I did not believe, driving back, that anything supernatural was occurring. I believed I had found a long-running act of institutional concealment, water diverted, accounts hidden, a district run for decades by men who had agreed among themselves not to ask certain questions. That is a serious thing, a corrupt and serious thing, but it is a human thing. I drove back out to the annex and I kept reading, because the way you break a concealment is with documents, and the documents were what I had. The maintenance reports were where the human explanation began to fail. A capped, abandoned main is not maintained. There is nothing to maintain. But the eastern grid, the streets that do not exist, had a continuous maintenance history. Valve exercising on a regular schedule. Hydrant flushing. 2 main breaks repaired, one in 1988 and one in 2003, with work orders, materials lists, and labor hours. Someone had dug up Halloran Street in 2003 and replaced 18 feet of cast iron main and backfilled it and paved over it, and had filed the paperwork. And the paperwork was real, with real material costs that I could trace to real purchase orders in the district's procurement records. The town had bought 18 feet of ductile iron pipe in 2003, and someone had installed it in a street that is not on any map, in ground that I have personally driven past, where there is nothing but wheat. I sat with that for a long time. You cannot reconcile a procurement record against an empty field. The pipe was bought. The money left the account. The pipe went somewhere. I could prove every link in that chain except the last one, and the last one was impossible. The pressure monitoring records removed the last of my comfort. Modern water systems log pressure continuously at monitoring points throughout the network, and pressure data is, in a sense, the most honest data a system produces because it cannot be faked without faking the physics. Pressure responds to demand. When people in a neighborhood wake up and shower, pressure dips. When they go to work, it recovers. When they come home and cook and water their lawns in the evening, it dips again. The daily curve of pressure at a monitoring point is a fingerprint of human life. You can read a neighborhood's whole routine in it without ever seeing a single person. There was a monitoring point on the eastern grid. The pressure-reducing station from the 1971 drawing had a logger, and it had been logging for as long as the technology had existed to do so. I pulled the data and plotted it, and I sat in that cold annex room and looked at the daily life of a neighborhood that does not exist. It was occupied. The curve was unmistakable. A morning draw sharp between 6 and 8, a midday lull, an evening peak, weekends flatter and later than weekdays, the way a residential area always is. Seasonal variation higher in summer, lawns and gardens, lower in winter. 41 homes worth of people getting up and washing and cooking and going to bed every day for as long as the instruments had been watching. The data was not flat the way a leak is flat or a metering error is flat. It breathed. Whatever was out there past the boundary in the wheat was alive in the only way my instruments could measure, and it had been living its small daily life in the dark off the books for 50 years. I am a professional, and I will give you the professional account of what I did next, because the alternative, to have stopped, to have driven home and certified the records and never gone back, is the kind of decision that, when I read it in someone else's story, I do not believe. I did not believe it of myself either. I had a finding I could not certify and could not explain, and the only thing left to do that I knew how to do was to go and look at the ground. I drove out on a Saturday. I told no one, which I now understand was a mistake, and which I am recording honestly rather than dressing up as caution. I took the as-built drawing, the GPS coordinates I had derived from it, my work phone, and a camera. The Northern District Main runs along the county road I delivered papers on as a boy. I followed it to the point where the current map says it terminates, and I parked, and I walked east along the section line toward the place where, according to a drawing made the year before I was born, Cardiff Street should begin. There was wheat. There was a fence line and a stand of trees along the creek and more wheat beyond it, exactly as I remembered, exactly as I had told myself there would be. For a moment I felt the enormous relief of a man whose nightmare has turned out to be a paperwork error after all, and I almost turned around. Then I found the valve box. It was set flush in the ground at the edge of the field. A cast iron lid the size of a dinner plate, the kind that sits over a buried main valve, the kind I have lifted 10,000 times. It was exactly where the drawing said the eastern grid began. The wheat grew right up to it and over it. The lid was worn smooth in the center the way a lid gets worn by being lifted, by a tool seated in it again and again over decades. I knelt and cleared the dirt from the rim, and I could see the casting marks, and I could see that it had been opened recently. The seam was clean, the dirt around it disturbed in a way that the undisturbed field around it was not. Someone exercises this valve. Someone had been here in this empty field, doing the maintenance the records described. I lifted the lid. Below it in the dark of the box was a valve stem, greased, turned, used. And cold air came up out of the ground, and with it a sound I have spent a great deal of effort trying to describe accurately to myself, because I do not want to exaggerate it and I do not want to soften it. It was the sound of water moving under pressure through a large pipe. A steady, full, working sound. Not a trickle, not a leak. The sound of a charged main feeding a system that is drawing on it. Below my feet, under the wheat in a place that is not on any map, water was running to 41 homes, and I was kneeling on top of it in an empty field with a cast iron lid in my hands and no one in the world who knew where I was. I want to be clear about what I did and did not see, because the difference matters and because the temptation in an account like this is to claim more than is true. I did not see houses. I did not see streets. I did not see people. There was nothing above the ground but wheat and the worn lid and the disturbed soil. Everything I am describing as impossible was below the surface, in the records and in the pipe, a neighborhood that existed entirely in the infrastructure that served it, in the water that ran to it and the pressure that breathed with its waking and sleeping, and nowhere else that a man standing in a field could perceive. I have thought about this a great deal. The thing out there is not hidden by trees or by distance. It is hidden by the surface of the ordinary world, which is whole and unbroken above it, the way the surface of water is whole above whatever is moving underneath. I photographed the valve box and the disturbed soil and the lid, and I logged the coordinates, and I drove home, and I did not sleep. On Monday, I went back to the annex with a different purpose. I no longer believed I would find an innocent explanation, and I no longer believed the concealment was confined to my county. A metering error you can blame on a transducer. A hidden subdivision you might, with enormous strain, blame on one corrupt district run by one set of old men. But the maintenance had standards. The work orders followed the state's own forms. The procurement went through the state's own systems. Whatever this was, it knew how the institution worked, intimately at the level of forms and codes and procurement thresholds, which meant it was not a secret kept by a few men in a shop on the edge of town. It was a secret kept by the system itself, so I searched the other counties. I had access, for the duration of the backlog clearance, to the as-built archives and consumption records for all 3 of my assigned counties, and through the state database to the operational maps of all 11 northern counties. I searched for the signature I now knew how to recognize. A flat, fixed residual in the water residual that did not respond to metering changes. A maintained grid in the as-builts that did not appear on the current operational map. A pressure logger whose data breathed. I found it in 4 more counties. I want to be precise. I did not find 5 identical neighborhoods. I found 5 different ones, with different street names and different connection counts and different construction dates ranging from 1958 to 1981. Each fed by an active part of a real municipal system, each maintained, each consuming, each absent from every current map, each missing from every billing system. The earliest one predated the digitization of any of these records, which means that whatever this is, it was already old when the institution I work for built the databases I used to look for it. It was here before the maps were drawn that fail to show it. There is a word I keep circling and have been avoiding, which is the word version. The 1971 drawing of the Eastern Grid was not drawn by a stranger. It was drawn in the same hand, with the same conventions and the same engineer's stamp, as the parts of my town that are real. The street names Cardiff, Halloran, Wexford, Pell are not random. They are the names of the men who founded the Central Water District in the 1930s, the names you see on the plaque in the lobby of the town hall, the names of the families that built the place I grew up in. Someone laid out a second version of my town, named its streets after the town's own founders, built it real water infrastructure, and put it in the ground east of the boundary in the wheat 50 years ago, and then ran it faithfully in the dark ever since, while the town I can see and touch went on living above it, never knowing it had a twin breathing underneath the field. I made copies of everything. I made them carefully, and I put them where the systems I have described do not reach, and then I made the mistake I had been warned about, though I did not understand at the time that I had been warned. I filed the escalation. I wrote the finding with the evidence attached, and I submitted it through the proper channel to the regional director, because that is what the procedure requires, and because 19 years had taught me that the procedure is what protects you. The finding did not come back rejected. It came back resolved. Within 2 days there was a notation in the system, in my own division, signed with a credential I did not recognize, stating that the discrepancies I had identified had been reviewed and reconciled against a supplementary service classification, and that no further action was required. The supplementary service classification is not a real thing. It does not exist in any code or manual I have ever read in 19 years. But it is in the system now, and it is attached to my finding, and it makes my finding disappear into a category that sounds official enough that no one will ever look at it again. Someone within 2 days knew exactly which administrative shape to give my discovery to make it vanish. They did not delete it. Deletion leaves a hole, and I would have seen the hole. They classified it. They squared the deck. The day after that, my access to the as-built archive was revoked. The reason given was the completion of the backlog clearance for my counties, which was true on paper. I had, in fact, completed the work I was assigned. The timing was the kind of thing you can never prove. And the day after that, Del Ackman called me. He was kind. He told me the state had wrapped up its review and that everything had checked out, and that he was glad it was settled, and that I should come by for coffee sometime, the way my father used to. And then he said, in the same warm voice, that he was glad to see I'd be staying on in the area, that a man does well to stay close to where his people are from, and that there'd always be a place for me here. I had not told him I was staying. I had not made any decision about staying. He said it the way you confirm an arrangement, not the way you express a hope. I have spent a long time since, with the consumption records I copied, the ones from my own county, the ones I am not supposed to have anymore. And I have found the last thing, the thing I have not been able to stop looking at, and the thing that is the reason I am writing this down rather than going on quietly with my life. The Eastern Grid had 41 connections in the 1971 drawing. The pressure data and the consumption volume were consistent with 41 occupied homes for most of the 50 years, but the volume is not flat anymore. Beginning a little over a year ago, beginning, as far as I can tell, around the time I drew this assignment, the consumption east of the boundary started to rise. Slowly. The flat line I had found, the one that had held indifferent through 2-meter replacements in 50 years, has begun to climb, the way a residual climbs when a system gains a new customer. The pressure curve has a new fingerprint in it now, a 40-second daily rhythm that was not there before, a small additional life waking and washing and going to bed in the dark under the wheat. Something out there has gained a household. The neighborhood that does not exist is growing, and it began to grow the moment I started to look. I do not know whose household it is. I have not been able to make myself check the connection numbers against any name, because I am afraid of which name I will find, and because I have read enough of these accounts to know what it does to a man to go looking for his own. I have stopped, at last, being careful about the wrong things. I have stopped lifting the lid. But the water is still running east of the boundary, under the field where there is nothing but wheat, and the volume goes up a little every month, and Del Ackman is glad I'll be staying close to where my people are from. I am writing this so there is a record that did not pass through their system. I do not know how much that is worth. The system knew what shape to give my last record within 2 days. I assume it already knows the shape of this one. I am going to put my copies where I have put them, and I am going to go on living in the town I can see. Above the town I cannot, and I am going to try very hard not to wonder, when I run the tap in the morning and the pressure dips, whether somewhere east of the boundary, in a house that is not on any map, someone with my street's founders' names is running theirs at the very same moment, and whether the household that woke up a year ago, the new one, the one that started growing the day I started looking, has been waiting all this time for me to come home.